Movie buff specialists Phil and John are back, and we are continuing watching the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies and also talking about something new. And tonight, that means we are on to the second movie in the MCU, and that is The Incredible Hulk, which came out about 2 months after Iron Man. And John and I are also going to be talking about Oppenheimer, which, of course, has made a little bit of money for Christopher Nolan. Over $400 million for an R-rated movie worldwide in just about a week, if you really count calendar days. It's 2 weekends, but like a week. So pretty impressive. So we're going to be talking about both of those. Me and John have some pretty strong opinions about Oppenheimer, one way or the other. And I also am going to bring up, what do you do to somebody who is obnoxious during a movie? Like, do you like, can we bring back tar and feathering? Is it allowed, John, or is it too soon to bring that back? Because
it's probably frowned upon, but I mean, our listeners are going to hear you talk about it the entire podcast, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, if it was during the Incredible Hulk, I probably would have applauded the guy because I would have been like, I get it. But if you go look, if you're listening to this, we don't get that many listeners, so if you're listening to this, like, you probably really like movies. If you go to a movie theater and you're dozing and you can't stay awake, leave. Like, just leave, because you're being an asshole to everybody around you, right? And if you're gonna go into the movie theater and you're gonna be just like on your phone the entire time, you are pissing off the people around you. Just remember that, okay? I just need to say that, because when you go to see Oppenheimer and it's a 3-hour movie and a guy snores for literally 3 hours, why did you show up that day? Like, why did you come?
I kind of want to take this and run with a tangent on it, because one thing I've noticed as like someone who does go to the theater a lot, behavior in theaters has gotten a lot worse. And I think there are a lot of things to consider that have really contributed to that. Obviously, like our dependency on technology and like the addiction to the stimuli from like social media and stuff like that attributes people on their phones all the time. Smartwatches are one of the things I hate the absolute most of the movie theater, because people don't even think about turning them off.
Yeah, I know.
But I think another thing is, like, we have to acknowledge the fact that COVID kind of changed the developmental process of people as they are viewing movies. Mm-hmm. Right? Because, like, I went and saw the new Spider-Verse movie, and there are these kids, like, probably like 11, 12, so like not terribly young, but they're just like getting up, running, and talking to their friends and stuff during the middle of this movie, and I'm just sitting there thinking, who does this in a movie theater? And it's just that the fact that, like, there was 2 years where people couldn't go to movie theaters. Mm-hmm. So we are about to hit a generation that just doesn't know how to act in a movie theater.
Yeah, and this is the old man yell at cloud part of your podcast. So welcome. We're sponsored by Geriatrics United. But it's so annoying because, like, look, I get, like, if I'm at home, I give my wife a hard time all the time. Like, we were watching Survivor Panama right now. And, like, I'm like, are you ready to watch? She's like, yeah. So I turn it on, and then I look over and she's on her phone, and I'll literally just stare at her. And she'll be like, I'm almost done. And I'm like, okay, well, you could have just told me you weren't ready. And, like, I'm obviously trolling her. But, like, when you go to a theater, I just don't understand why you spend the money, because movies aren't cheap anymore. And that's the thing that blows my mind the most is, like, maybe you're going with your mom and dad's money if you're like a younger person. But the guy who was snoring the whole time was probably older than you and me. He wasn't like an old man where it's like, oh, he probably has like narcolepsy or something. Like, this was just a guy who came in with a tub of popcorn, fell asleep, and every time he woke up, it was just to look at his phone and check something, and then he'd go back to sleep. And he was snoring the whole time. And I even went out and asked the people in the theater, I'm like, is there anything we can do about this? And they said no. And it's a little mom and pop theater around the corner for me, which I always like going to those, because I think that is like an interesting experience, and it's a little bit different than an AMC or a Regal or whatever other people will have. But I'll never go to that theater again. I really won't go there again. Like, they've lost a customer not because of really them. Like, you can only control the people who come into your theater so much, but because I'm not going to go to a place where I'm going to have to fight with a guy snoring, or the people in front of me. The girl in front of me was texting the entire time, and she wasn't texting. That's what was more annoying. She was on Snapchat, and I was making so many passive aggressive comments, and she would like turn her head and then just go back to looking at Snapchat. And I'm like, if these are the people that are going to your theater, I'm not going to the theater. And to address the noise issue, at the part where the atomic bomb goes off, right? The atomic bomb goes off and there is pure silence and it's bright. This guy is snoring the whole time. And then the loudest noise I might have ever heard in the history of cinema explodes on screen, and this guy slept straight through it. straight through it, snored
That's
straight through
really
it.
impressive.
And what was even more impressive is you could pretty much hear him over the atomic bomb noise. That's how insane it was. So this is my rant. This is my tangent. This is my call to action for the people who are going to hear this. If you want to share this with others, please do. If you go to a movie with friends and they're on their phones and they're insisting to text or Snapchat or do whatever, or they start falling asleep and they're snoring, or they're talking the entire time, or like when I saw Babylon and these 4 old women over to the left of us were talking about after the first party scene, how this movie stunk and they don't want to be there. And then they just continue to talk and laugh through the entire movie. And I was like, why are you all here? And they like didn't understand the question because obviously the intelligence thing wasn't there. But I was like, what are you doing? If that's happening with people you're with, tell them to stop. Because it's even if people aren't saying anything to you, it's aggravating people. Trust me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't remember. I can't think of the last time. Actually, that's not true. I went to the theater on Saturday and didn't think this. But there are very few times in the last little while that I've gone to the theater and not thought about at least one person being like, man, you're being pretty disrespectful right now.
It's just annoying, man. It's stupid. And it's something like theaters almost need to go back to the days of like you literally hire somebody to like sit in that theater. Like you just need to hire somebody to like go in that theater and be like, you need to get off your phone. And if it's disruptive, it'll be disruptive for a year. And this is a great year to do it because of the writer's strike. And then after that disruption is over, people are going to be like, wow, if I pull out my phone, they might actually get mad at me. And the thing that frustrates me is I used to live in LA where people were a lot better with movie theaters for the most part. You still were going to have an experience here and there, but for the most part, now I'm in Florida where, I mean, it's like they've never been to a movie before. And I remember this when I was in college down here and they were so bad. But I figured like over time, maybe people would get better. And it's just every theater you go to in Florida, you're like, is this the first time you've ever come into a movie theater? Like, what's wrong with you? So all of that is a prelude to, what we're about to talk about here. But go ahead. You looked like you had something you wanted to add to that.
Well, I just think like for a lot of these people, yes, it probably is the first time they've been in the theater in a long time.
It's like a 60-year-old. Like, I mean, come on.
Yeah, well, sure. But like, I think streaming also does it because like, the living room movie watching is just so different than a theater movie watching, and like people just don't seem to understand that when the lights are off, we don't want your bright phone light on.
Yeah, well, and I will say this too, and I think it is interesting how people have kind of changed because of that. Even when you used to rent a movie from Blockbuster, you didn't have a phone in your hands. You might pause it to go to the bathroom, to answer a phone, a landline. For those of you who don't know what that is, it was a phone that was attached to the wall and had a cord. And you used to answer that. And like that might happen, but you weren't going to just be like, oh, I'm going to go through and look at the internet, or I'm going to look and see what's going on. It's like, if something that important is going on, like my favorite part about going to a movie, it's almost like being on an airplane, but not feeling like you're going to die, is you go into a movie theater and you have 2.5 to 3.5 hours where nobody can get in touch with you. Like the world could fall down around me outside and I don't care and I don't know because I'm in a movie theater. Like that's why I went to do this. It's a relaxation thing. It's to get away. I think people just don't get that. And I don't know. I mean, maybe it'll change over time. Maybe some people will just start staying home. Maybe it'll almost be like movie theaters will become like malls. But at the same time, you need people to go to the movies so that movies can stay open, because Barbie and Oppenheimer were huge for movie theaters this year. I mean, they were huge, and I'm happy people are seeing them. I just wish people were happy that I was seeing them and actually wanted to watch it. Yeah. So all of that's to say is, holy crap, the Incredible Hulk sucked. Welcome to this podcast. Okay. I need to say that. Okay, first I would say Jordan Alford. People don't understand that a theater is a shared experience, not a personal one. So they've lost awareness of how them doing things can easily annoy others. And Raptor 8415 said the fear of death on an airplane heightens the experience of watching movies on an airplane for me, weirdly. Okay, here we are.
That is bizarre.
That is bizarre. Although I did watch Me and Earl and the Dying Girl on an airplane, and the pilot or somebody hit the wrong button and it did the flashing red lights at the part where the dying girl is dying. Wow, did that make that movie a 4-star movie for me? But wow. Okay. So when we started the MCU thing, I knew there were going to be movies that I wasn't really going to like. Like and I talk about this all the time, I really did not like Black Panther. I thought it was a bad movie. Like I have so many problems with the story and just the direction. And I didn't think the action was all that exciting. Like and the reason I always pick on Black Panther is because after the Avengers, Black Panther is the only one I saw. So I need to pick on Black Panther because there's no other ones to pick on. And I'm sure there's going to be ones I really hate. But when we set off to do this, I was like, okay, it's almost like James Bond, or I started rewatching the Planet of the Apes because John and I were in a book club together because we're adults and we read Planet of the Apes. So I started rewatching the old movies. And obviously the first one's a masterpiece and they become schlocky. But you have an expectation of, okay, I know what I'm going into. It's probably going to entertain me. And there's probably going to be things where I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I ever saw. Like I watched Moonraker last night. That is one of the worst movies ever. And I still gave it 2.5 stars because I was thoroughly, 2 stars. I gave it 2 because I was thoroughly entertained. And I think the Jaws storyline is hilarious. But this movie isn't even entertaining. This movie is just bad. And I don't get what the hell they were doing.
I don't know if they knew what they were doing, because if you watch this movie, there are so many choices that just make absolutely no sense. I get the idea to like kind of forego an origin story. You have to remember Ang Lee's Hulk came out like 5 years before this. So like the Hulk, and you also have to keep in mind the Incredible Hulk is one of the more popular Marvel characters of all time, right? Like the 70s TV show was huge. Even like during the 90s cartoons and stuff, like the Hulk's a very well-known Marvel character. And you just had this massive flop of a film in Ang Lee's Hulk do the origin story. So I get the idea of not giving us the origin story. But man, it was such a mistake because it made it so nothing in this movie mattered.
No, it's all over the place. And what's funny about these two, and I almost wanted to watch the Ang Lee Hulk, and then I remembered like, man, I need to just live my life. Like you can be a cinephile and you can want to be a completionist, but at some point you have to draw a line. And I saw the original Hulk back in 2003 or whatever when it came out. And I remember as an 11-year-old being like, this is bad. And so I don't need to go back and rewatch that. But you can tell that they were trying to do the exact opposite of what that movie did. That movie really takes time. It's very, very slow. It's very boring. It's monotonous. It just goes on and on and on. And then he becomes the Hulk. And this one wanted to rush right into it. But with the storytelling decisions they made, I don't know why I'm supposed to root for Bruce Banner. I don't like Bruce Banner. Bruce Banner is not a hero because Bruce Banner, all I see in the opening credits origin story, which is the stupidest way to do this, because I didn't even know I was supposed to be paying attention to the opening credits. I'm looking at the names and then I look over and I'm like, Liv Tyler has blood coming out of her head. That's interesting. So you do that. And all you do is show Bruce Banner as kind of like a cocky guy because he's winking like, this is going to be good. And then beating the crap out of people. And now he's on the run. I don't understand why I'm supposed to like him. I don't understand what the experiment was that he was doing. And even after watching the whole movie, I still barely understand what the hell the experiment was that they were doing. I get they were trying to create the super soldier, but what was the process? Why did they choose Bruce Banner? What was going on? Like, in that, you can read the comics, you can do everything. And this is where I will always say, like, I am watching a movie and I'm basing it on the movie. I'm not talking about a book that I also read or a comic or a TV show or anything. Based on this movie, I don't know why the hell I'm supposed to give a damn about Bruce Banner.
Well, and that's another interesting thing about the way that they changed the Hulk origin story in this movie, because I don't know if you remember Ang Lee's Hulk or if you've even divulged into the comics. Bruce Banner gets his powers by saving someone.
Did not know that.
Because in like the comics, they're testing this new bomb. And there's this teenager who like has wandered onto the bomb site. So Bruce Banner goes out, pushes him into a trench, and then gets the gamma burst and becomes the Hulk. And doesn't even know he's the Hulk for a long time because it's like this Jekyll Hyde thing, right? They actually think it's like a werewolf thing for a while. You think he only turns into it at night until they realize it's triggered by anger. This movie made it seem so selfish because it's just like, Bruce decided to do this experiment on himself for some reason. Yeah.
Gave up his whatever, I guess, girlfriend. I don't even know. Like, I still don't really understand what they are. But gave up that, maybe gave up his good job that we don't ever hear about or anything, and yet can control it immediately. Like, isn't the whole point of the Hulk, like, he can't control it, and that's why he becomes the Hulk, and then that's why, like, he just does things? It's supposed to be a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing, or a, what do you call it? The Wolfman or something like that, where you have no control. It just happens. And the fact that like immediately he's almost like become something else. And then what I found so annoying about this movie is like the scene where like after they run away and they do whatever, you could tell that they were trying to copy and paste Peter Jackson's King Kong.
Yes,
dude,
100%. I thought the
oh
exact same thing.
Oh my God. And if you wanna imitate, if you want to emulate, if you want to mimic, if you want to do any of those synonyms, try. Because wow, was that pathetic. And what did you learn from those scenes that you were trying to emulate? Nothing. You learned absolutely nothing. You learned big man, small girl. That's what you learned from that. It's so bad, but it was such a blatant copycat. And I kind of wanted to rewatch that King Kong.
I'm pretty sure it was the same, because I watched that King Kong recently. I'm pretty sure it's the same digital rendering from that sequence.
It looks spot on, man. Like, yeah. It's crazy. It's absolutely
because
crazy.
You do have to keep in mind, this is a Universal film too, right? And this is actually a big thing with the Hulk in general, and why we haven't seen another solo Hulk film since this one. Universal held the rights to the Incredible Hulk until last month. So Disney couldn't make a Hulk movie even if they wanted to. It's why he's been a side character in all of these movies. And it seems a little fishy that this like King Kong scene's in here when it's made by the same studio that made King Kong.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good conspiracy theory, John. I like this one. I like where we're going with this. Because, well, and what's funny now is, do you think with Disney in their absolute desperation, because Disney is on one of the biggest downward spirals we've seen from an entertainment company in decades. Seriously. I mean, this is they're falling apart in every aspect of their company. Do you think that now that they have the rights, that there is any chance they try to make a Mark Ruffalo Hulk movie?
There's a really good Hulk storyline from the comics that I think they're building towards. It's been hinted at in future movies that we'll discuss eventually. There's some really good Hulk storylines with some really good Hulk characters. You need to flush out the characters though for it to be worth it.
Because and I didn't see it, so I'm speaking out my side here, but Abomination is in Shang-Chi, right?
Like it's a brief like blink and you miss it cameo.
Oh, okay. So I wasn't sure if like they were trying to like set something up, but I just know what's in it.
I will say Abomination wasn't She-Hulk.
Okay.
Because we're not going to watch the series, so you're never going to know that.
No, actually, I saw the Megan the Trainer twerking scene. That's all. I got the show. I get the gist now.
In fact, there are 3 characters in this movie who are supposedly going to be pivotal to Phase 5 of the MCU.
Man, we're in trouble, huh? We're in trouble.
And that's not including Bruce Banner / the Hulk.
Who are the other 3? The General?
Yeah, Thunderbolt Ross, who William Hurt's dead, so they have recast him with Harrison Ford,
who is like in his mid-80s now, so that's the ballsy choice. Okay, continue.
And Samuel Stern, who's the scientist at the end of the movie, who hasn't been seen since this movie, is supposedly going to be in the new Captain America movie.
Is that the one who is played by Tim Blake Nelson?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. I liked him. I thought he was the best part of the movie. He felt like he was actually popping out of the Incredible Hulk comics. That's what was interesting about him. Like everything else felt. It's almost like with J. Jonah Jameson when J.K. Simmons plays J. Jonah Jameson. He is literally J. Jonah Jameson. Like nobody else. I haven't seen the other Spider-Man movies, but nobody else is J. Jonah Jameson the way J.K. Simmons was. Like he nailed the comic, he nailed the TV show, just nailed it across the board. That's what Samuel Stearns felt like. So I'm okay with that one. And then who's going to be the other one? Is it going to be Ty Burrell's character?
Tim Roth. It's Tim Roth's character.
Okay. And is it's still going to be Tim Roth?
Yeah. Tim Roth reprised his role in She-Hulk.
Good for Tim Roth, man. I'm happy for him though. I like Tim Roth.
Yeah.
He was doing his best. But when the script is written on a piece of toilet paper that's used, it's really hard to give a good performance.
It is. And like I actually think Marvel really benefited from the fact that Edward Norton asked for a bunch more money to do the Avengers.
Do you think Ed Norton was a problem then?
What do you mean? Like in this movie?
Like, are you trying to say
as an actor?
like, well, because you're saying they benefited because then it wasn't Ed Norton, it became Mark Ruffalo. Do you think
Yeah,
that was?
so everyone forgot about this movie.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Like,
That makes sense.
there's no reason for people really to revisit this movie because Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner feels so different than the performance we get from Ed Norton here, right? This feels like an Ed Norton character, right? It feels like Ed Norton and almost anything else. Thanks, Jordan. I needed that affirmation. But that's what it comes down to is because this character is recast in the Avengers, everyone kind of forgot this movie existed. And not to mention, like, people kind of forgot this movie existed when it first came out anyways. It's a month after Iron Man. This is the start of the 1 week in phase 1 of Marvel, where the events of this movie, Iron Man 2 and Thor all take place within 1 week within the cinematic universe. And this is the one that everyone forgets. And no one goes back to it. We didn't get a returning character from this outside of the Incredible Hulk until Civil War. But I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to say who it is. But like, we don't see a recurring character. That was 8 years after this movie came out.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, like, that's what you're probably right. And I don't know because I barely remember Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk because I saw him one time. But you're probably right because this movie is totally forgotten. Both Hulks, really, at this point. I mean, now we're 15 years removed from this one. We're 20 years removed from the Ang Lee.
Yeah.
And people don't talk about either of them ever.
No.
Ever. No. And I would almost bet that there's probably massive Marvel fans out there who might have started watching after the Avengers or something and then went back and rewatched who haven't even seen this movie. Like, I would bet there's a lot of people who haven't watched this movie because nobody talks about it. Look, I hear how great these Marvel movies are all the time. And then every time I watch one, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty good. Or it was really bad. Or I despised it. Like, it's one of those three things. And this is not one that anybody ever mentions. And I will say another thing about it. So Ed Norton, first of all, I love Ed Norton. So I'll just say that. But Ed Norton hasn't, like, he has his little bit parts here and there, and he'll have a big role every now and then. But Ed Norton's not the household name he was in like the late 90s, early 2000s. No. Like, he's just not anymore. And the other thing that really helps is nobody in the history of time has ever had their name plastered, hired in credits for no apparent reason than Liv Tyler. And I think that really helps this movie, though, because people aren't going and seeking out the filmography of Liv Tyler. And I don't think they're really going out and seeking the filmography of Edward Norton anymore. I think cinephiles are, but they're skipping this one because they're looking. If you really like movies, you're going to be like, oh, I should watch Primal Fear because I've never heard of that or I've never seen that. And I think that probably helps. I mean, the fact that they're able to brush this under the rug is very nice for Marvel. It really is. Like, that really works in their favor, because if this was more integral and if the characters were more important and if the story was like, a bigger deal in the universe, that's not good. And I almost wonder if it's a bad decision to start bringing back up all these side characters from this movie so that you can watch Phase 5, because do you really want people going back and rewatching this movie?
It's a big question. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that, like, the timing of the rights changing and everything like that. I think a lot of it comes to the fact that, like, maybe even Marvel forgets how bad this movie is.
Yeah.
Because that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
When I found out who directed this movie, because I wasn't sure going into it, and I looked it up while I was watching it. Another, like, cinema sin with me is I always look up like actors and stuff while I'm watching movies at home, to like try to get that memory where I'm. Louis Leterrier. Do you know what he had made prior to this movie?
Well, so prior, I knew Transporter 2.
Both Transporters.
Did he direct the first Transporter?
He did the first one as well. Yeah.
Okay, now I need to look because I'm being told something. I knew he did that, and I just looked him up on. I just clicked the button, and I don't see him. I don't see him listed on Letterboxd. But yeah, he did.
I have his IMDb page built up. Yeah.
Why is it not on Letterboxd? Because I was like, oh, he did Transporter 2. That's nice. I didn't realize he did Transporter 1. Yeah, it's not on his Letterboxd. That's so funny.
So he did the first two Transporters. He did the Jet Li movie Unleashed, and then he did this one.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, he's done Clash of the Titans, The first Now You See Me, and the last Fast and Furious movie that just came out.
Yeah.
So, like, when I'm watching this movie and I'm seeing these foot chases and stuff, it's like, I understand. Like, I get it. I get what's happening here. Like, you picked a director to do this specifically.
Yeah, you picked an action director. You picked an action director for what should be one of the more personal storylines. And what I read about also with Ed Norton wanting more money, Ed Norton wasn't happy with the script and he wanted it to go a different direction where it was more personal. And instead they said, no, we want to go this more action-based route. Ed Norton's 100% right. And that's why Ed Norton, even though he might not be the household name he was 10 years ago, continuously makes good decisions when it comes to movies. I mean, he was in Birdman and he was nominated for the Oscar for that. So, like, he makes the right decisions and he has a good mind for writing and whatever. This was the way I look at this movie. This is like Quantum of Solace, right? It might not end up being the worst, but it makes no sense with what the rest of the movies are. Like, it is such a different feel, and it's just so like with Quantum of Solace, they edit that movie like it's a Michael Bay movie. It's whatever. That's not how James Bond movies are made. And when you look at this Incredible Hulk movie, this isn't how these Marvel movies are made. In the little bit of knowledge I have, they aren't made like this. They're CG high heavy. They're all of that. They have their big action set pieces, but yes, this was edited like it was a very basic action movie.
I've never thought about this. I wonder how much the writer's strike impacted this film.
Yeah, Jordan Alford just said they came out the same year, and I didn't realize that, but that's probably true because Quantum of Solace got smoked by the writer's strike.
Yeah, because Daniel Craig was like doing rewrites on the side of the set for that movie. So, like, I wonder if that has something to do with it. Maybe it explains why, like, there are things in this movie that don't really make sense. Maybe it explains the inexplicable absence of. I don't know how you missed this. Like, you're making a Hulk movie, and Ed Norton and Liv Tyler are like getting hot and heavy, and we don't get the line, "You won't like me when I'm horny." And I don't know why. Like, how do you miss that writing opportunity?
Because the relationship between Ed Norton and Liv Tyler didn't earn that line, John. That relationship is one of the worst written relationships I've ever seen in a movie ever in the history of time.
Well, and that's another thing I really want to talk about, because you get to this point where they're in this Italian restaurant for some reason. Like, this character that we have no idea who this person is. Is it her grandfather? Like, what is the relationship to this old man that these two people have? And we get the longing look and stuff. She goes out into the back alley and she's like, "Bruce." Like, the quietest whisper of Bruce. It's like, I'm sorry, you think you're chasing this guy? Why aren't you yelling after him?
Because Liv Tyler doesn't know how to yell. The one part in the movie where she yells, I was like, wow, I thought she only whispered. I thought she only mouth breathed when she spoke her lines of dialogue. I'm sorry, that's what she does in every movie. And I love so many movies Liv Tyler is in, but that's what she does.
Yeah. But then we get the scene where, like, she's pulling up behind him, and it's supposed to be this big, like, emotional scene. And you're just sitting there being like, I don't know what your relationship is. Like, I can piece it together based on, like, some of the hints that we've seen and stuff, but, like, I'm not invested in it as a viewer.
It's huge. I mean, you don't feel anything for either of them because you don't see him lose her. You don't know what they were like before that. I mean, one of the greatest movies ever made, I talk about it all the time, and it has a better relationship, is between Armageddon's Liv Tyler and Ben Affleck. It has a better described relationship between those two characters than the relationship in this. And if I am saying that, that says a lot, because that relationship, all sarcasm aside, is so terribly developed, and everybody makes fun of that the entire time. And it's so much better than this. And it's like, I don't get what they were doing. Were they just banking on the fact that people would recognize Liv Tyler and Ed Norton and be like, okay, cool, they can have a relationship? Everything they say to each other is uninteresting. It was like, okay, this is like your third date after going on a first Tinder date, and the second one wasn't that good, but you guys just hang out a third time anyway, just to make sure. But I'm supposed to believe you're in love now. Like, it was terrible.
Yeah. I have so many questions about the casting for this movie. Like, I guess, like, Liv Tyler's coming off Lord of the Rings and everything, so, like, I get it.
But even
kind
that
of.
was like 5 years before this. I mean, she did
I know.
Strangers the same year as this.
Sure. Which is a pretty underrated movie, so that's fine. But Ed Norton, I was watching this last night, and I had to think, did they just pick Ed Norton because he was in Fight Club, which is another movie with a disassociative character?
I know. I
Because
don't get
like
really. Yeah.
I do really love Ed Norton. Obviously, like Birdman's one of my favorite movies. I love I love his performances in things like Moonrise Kingdom and like these little
American
bit parts he
History
has and
X,
everything. Yeah,
Italian
right.
Job. I mean, he's very 25th Hour is one of the most underrated movies ever made. I
Mhm.
love The Illusionist. I talk about that all the time. I
Yeah,
mean, he was on Heater for a while.
yeah, and like first off, this doesn't seem like a movie Ed Norton would normally take. It's like this big studio blockbuster compared to all those movies we just listed, which are not big studio blockbusters. And he just seems so out of place here. And like his performance does feel a bit dialed in,
Mhm.
like phoned in.
Mhm.
And there are moments where you see he's trying, and moments where it's like, okay, he's given up on this movie.
Mhm.
But like they just didn't give him anything to work with.
Yeah. No, the script is terrible. And I mean, if you're a huge Marvel fan, you just get used to me saying that line a lot because it's going to happen. But like, again, I know what I'm sitting down to watch. So I'm willing to
Mhm.
give into the suspension of disbelief. I mean, like I said, I watched the first two Planet of the Apes today because we finished the book. The second movie used to be my favorite as a child. It's nonsense. Like it's total nonsense. It's pure 1970s schlock where they just wanted to make a
Mhm.
sequel and Charlton Heston didn't want to be the lead and they didn't know what to do. But I give it the benefit of the doubt because do I still enjoy it? Yeah, I do. Even though
Mhm.
it's not a good script and it is what it is, I still enjoy it. And when I talk about Armageddon, I love Armageddon. I even so anybody who didn't listen to our top 100 movies, I talk about Armageddon all the time. Even though I know it's a bad movie, I really enjoy it. There was nothing to even enjoy about this movie. The script was bad, the acting was bad, the action was bad. Everything was bad. And that's what my problem is. Like if I'm entertained and I'm laughing at it being bad, this is probably a 2-star movie. But I was just frustrated because I'm like, why is it still going? And why is it going
Mhm.
this way? And how, with Ed Norton, William Hurt, Liv Tyler, and Tim Roth, is this what they made? And I'm also going to throw out another name that nobody ever talks about just because I love him and I just want to give him a name drop. But Peter Mensa, who is in this for literally 15 seconds, he is I forget the name of the thing, but he plays in Spartacus, the TV show, which might be the most underrated TV show of all time. And he plays the guy who like controls the slave camp. Peter Mensa, go watch that show and be like, how did they give him 15 seconds in this movie? But I don't think that show had come out yet, so that's probably not their problem. But I just like to throw his name
Well,
out there.
how about the
They have
fact
so
that
much to work with.
How about the fact that Michael Kenneth Williams is a background extra in this movie?
Yeah, what the hell, man?
Like, This is coming off the wire,
Yeah.
and you have this guy as a background character that, like, in a blink and you miss it character.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just like I don't know. This movie, it felt like they didn't know what they were doing. I think at this point, Marvel still didn't know what they were doing. Like they were kind of
Mhm.
building up this like big thing. They didn't know how big this was going to be, and they tried to tell another really self-contained story, but it makes no sense, especially when you start like getting into the logic of it. You get into the logic of like what the U.S. military does in this movie. Well, just don't because
Yeah.
it's like okay, they are like doing this operation in Brazil in the like broad daylight, and like yeah, that's gonna be bad. They're blowing up the University of Toronto because that is where that was filmed. Absolutely, it's just like none of this movie has any logic to it. There's no sense to it. We aren't even told at any point why Bruce is trying to get rid of the Hulk. It's
Exactly.
never voiced in
We
this
don't get
movie.
it. Nope. Why is he trying to get rid of it? It clearly, if he can control it somewhat, isn't it's like the greatest security system of all time. So what are you worried about?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes no sense. Like the character motivation's not there. It's not developed enough, and it's they tried to fast forward these things that would have made this movie so much better.
Yeah. Let's talk about the big thing, John, and then we'll move on because I don't need to talk about this movie anymore. So talk
Yeah.
about the biggest moment of this movie. Go.
So if you're, Bruce Banner and you're trying to get away from people, there is one place very good to go. That is Bella Coola, British Columbia, because I lived there for 3 years, and it is the middle of nowhere. When I talk about living in the middle of nowhere, it's where the end of this movie happens. As it came on screen, I was like, oh, these are flashbacks. I know this exact area. I know this cabin. I know the person who owns that cabin. For some reason, they actually filmed this in Bella Coola. And then we get to this envelope that's addressed to Bruce Banner. And that is not the Bella Coola postal.
That was my favorite thing. John texted me and he goes, "This is not the Bella Coola zip code." And I was like, dude, you're the only person who actually has access to a TV that will know that. So what is wrong with you?
I'm aware, but there's a mnemonic to learn the Bella Coola postal code, because there are two cities and that's two settlements in the Bella Coola Valley. You have Bella Coola and Haggensburg are about 20 kilometers apart. Sorry, the Canadian comes out. I'm not sure what that is in miles, but
it's about 12 miles, 12 and a half.
They have incredibly similar postal codes. It's V0T, and then Bella Coola is 1C0, and Haggensburg is 1H0. And you remember it by remembering one car only and one horse only.
Love
that. So
it's
stuck there. I will always remember that postal code. Also, because when you live in Bella Coola, you'll learn things about the postal system and how to abuse it that you would not learn other places in the world.
So that's for another podcast, John.
but it's just one of those things where it's like, this is such a nitpick that, again, I am the only person who will probably ever watch this movie and nitpick this, but it absolutely just made this not great movie even worse at the very end.
I have to give John his moments of Canadian triumph. I have to give it to him every now and then. But yeah, I mean, it's funny that it's in Bella Coola. That made me laugh at the end. I'm like, he went from the slums of Rio to Bella Coola of all places. It's just so funny.
This is literally the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John tells me about where he's from, and it scares the living daylights out of me. And I'm so happy I will never go there.
But it's a good place for the Hulk to show up, because the Hulk can go on a rampage in Bella Coola. Everyone's just going to think it's a bear.
and by everyone, you mean all 14 people who are going to see him. And then
there's 2,000 people in this 60-kilometer valley. No one, if he doesn't want to be seen, he won't be seen.
And for anybody who's wondering, that's about 40 miles.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I'm here to help out our American friends. All right, let's move on, and let's talk about something that, even if you didn't love it, it still got a much higher rating than The Incredible Hulk. So let's talk about Oppenheimer, which is Christopher Nolan's newest movie, looking like a front runner for Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Director, maybe. I think it's going to be a front runner for a whole lot of stuff down the line. And while John might disagree, if it were to win Best Picture, it would be the best picture winner. I think in a long time. I didn't love I thought Everything Everywhere All at Once was really good, but I also think that it was super overrated, because I think people just there's a whole second act where they just poke each other in the forehead. And that just kind of got old for me. But so it'd be on par with that, maybe a little bit better, but far superior to Nomadland and whatever else.
So back to Parasite, you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much back to Parasite is what I'm saying, because Parasite's a masterpiece, and we agree on that. But this comes out 3 hours long and R-rated, which is fun, because Nolan doesn't generally make R-rated movies. I think it was his first one since Insomnia, right? If I'm not mistaken, because he had done a lot of R-rated movies at the beginning of his career and then stopped so that he could become the PG-13 master. Good for him, because he made a whole bunch of money, and now it seems like he's trying to back off and kind of make more serious movies. Dunkirk, Tenet was nonsense, but those two at least. I'm very curious how this movie will stand over the next 6 months in the build up to Oscar season, because this is a guaranteed Best Picture nominee. This is a guaranteed Best Director nominee. This is a guaranteed Best Actor nominee, and it's a guaranteed Best Supporting Actor nominee. Other things, I don't know. Screenplay, it'll probably get, even though John and I both kind of agree it doesn't deserve it. But everything else, it's a guaranteed nominee. But I am curious how this is going to stand once we're out of this Barbenheimer craze and we get into other movies have come out, and now people are at home who didn't see this in theaters and are saying, I'm going to sit down and watch this 3-hour movie. I'm very curious because I felt that this was a very different Christopher Nolan movie, which I kind of appreciated about it, though.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be really interesting, especially when you consider there's going to be another 3-hour epic coming out in 3 months.
Which is
the new Scorsese film.
Yeah, The Flowers. Yeah.
Right. So it'll be very interesting because I think both of those are pretty much guaranteed Best Picture noms, unless Flowers is terrible. But you can write it in now, right? Like there's 10 nominees. Both of these movies will probably be on the ballot.
And even if Flowers is terrible, they're going to nominate it because it's Scorsese. Like that's going to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to dispel the misconception that I disliked this movie. I didn't dislike this movie. I enjoyed it. I just didn't like it as much as everyone else seems to like it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think there are some really good things. I do think like the direction and the art direction. This is a stunning looking film. This film looks great. I really appreciate Nolan's use of actual explosives to create explosions and stuff in it. It's great. It's great to not see that animated. No, he did not blow up a nuclear bomb. Some people seem to think that's what he did.
Thank God.
That's ridiculous. My God, could you imagine the budget of this movie if that were the case?
Yeah. They would need to make about $10 billion to make this worthwhile. Yeah.
Cillian Murphy. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. Like, and I've been a big Cillian Murphy fan for a long time. I've loved him in Batman Begins and Sunshine, in 28 Days Later. Like, he is so good. This movie is so aggressively mid because of how bad this screenplay is.
See, I do disagree, and I'm going to throw this in there with Jordan's comment, John, because I gave you the yes from him, and now I'm going to give you this one, John. Respectfully, you're wrong. But no, so I get where you're coming from, but maybe my expectations were different than other people's coming into this, because despite the snoring guy, I was going to call him a name, but I'll just call him Guy, snoring so restfully near us. Despite that, I actually felt that this was a nice return to form for Nolan from a screenplay perspective, because I felt that Tenet was pure nonsense. I felt that Dunkirk was unnecessarily confusing, which I felt with Dunkirk, it took away from the characters, right? I felt that I wasn't as invested in their lives or their stories because I was still trying to figure out what did he mean by 1 hour or whatever. Like it was just unnecessary. And I felt that it was I don't get why. And then with this, the jumping around at the beginning didn't really bother me, and I didn't have a hard time following it, and I was totally fine with it, and I was good with it. And I actually felt it did a good job of building up Strauss as like kind of rooting for Strauss. Like was he defending Oppenheimer? And then by the end, you get the 180 and the flip of he's actually the villain of this movie. And I did kind of like the McCarthyism hearing that was going on in this movie, because have you ever seen Good Night and Good Luck?
No.
You would really enjoy Good Night and Good Luck. You should really watch Good Night and Good Luck.
It's about McCarthyism, because there is nothing that excites me more than McCarthyism.
It is about McCarthyism, and it was the George Clooney, David Strathairn.
Yeah.
David Strathairn got an Oscar nomination. It came out the same year. It was the Oscars the same year as Crash and Brokeback Mountain and all that stuff. But like I really enjoyed the direction it took it, because I felt that if we would have gotten a general, straightforward biopic or biopic, however you want to say it, tomato, I don't know, but people do. But if we'd gotten that straightforward version of like, this was Oppenheimer, and this is why he got invested, and then this was him growing up, and these were his ties to the Communist Party, which is ultimately what was going to take him down, but then we're going to tell the story of him going and doing the bomb and blah, blah, blah. You start getting into like that Hidden Figures type thing where like, look, they did this great thing to make the world better, but you're telling it in like a very bland way. And I felt that I felt the screenplay worked.
So you're saying that if it was a linear story, it would have been kind of boring because of the events that were happening? Because I don't necessarily focusing on the events.
Well, yes. So I don't think it necessarily would have been boring because of the events that were happening. I think that it would have I feel like you would not have gotten heightened moments when you needed heightened moments. Does that make sense? I feel like
it
you
does
would
make
have
sense.
probably had a solid hour and a half where you're like, okay,
I mean,
like,
I'm gonna admit that was me for the most of this movie. But I think what it comes down to is it felt like none of these characters, not very few of these characters were fleshed out. Outside of Oppenheimer, Strauss, these characters were all really boring. They weren't written very well. Like they had some interesting moments, but they were just lacking. They're lacking, and I think my biggest problem with this film, because I do have problems with this film, I think my biggest problem with this film is I felt this story had so much more potential to say more than what Nolan was willing to say. Because this does come across as a very by the book biopic in the end. Like it doesn't even feel. I think there's one scene that's absolutely stunning in this, and it's when he goes into the auditorium and is giving the speech and like is the flashes of the bomb and everything. Gorgeous scene, best scene in the entire movie in my opinion. That's about the extent of the morality discussion we get from Oppenheimer's character.
See, I disagree. I think we get a lot of morality stuff, but I think he, being the closed off person he is trying so desperately to act like he's just doing a job. And he's trying so desperately. And I think there's a parallel made here between they're fighting the Nazis, who the whole thing with the Nazis is, well, I was just doing my job, like I was just doing that.
Yeah.
There's a parallel with that and him making a bomb to blow up a lot of innocent people and knowing he was about to blow up a lot of innocent people. So I do think we get the morality, but I think the reason why it's a little bit more and okay, so I guess I respect that it didn't delve into, but I'm going to end the world. I'm going to do this. Like, I respect that it didn't get into like this manic, oh my God. Because another comparison I'll make is Downfall, which I don't know if you've ever seen Downfall, but that's the movie where they actually have Adolf Hitler and he's the main character.
Yeah.
It kind of felt like that, where it's like, okay, I am thinking about the things I've done, but I'm trying so desperately to pretend that it doesn't matter, that I was right, that I was doing something correct. And what I think is very telling about this movie, and maybe it's just an irony that I find, and maybe it doesn't ring true for everybody, but I love that at the end of this movie, ultimately he's indicted for being a communist or having communist sympathies or whatever it is, when he made something that killed millions of innocent people. And he was praised for that, but he was a villain for thought. And I see, like, to me, and maybe I'm overthinking this because maybe like I was thinking like I'm thinking about throwing pieces of popcorn in this guy's mouth, but like part of me wants to strangle him. So I'm a good person for only thinking. But I think in our society now, as well as in the past, people are being punished so much more for thought than they are for actual actions. And I think that still rings so true. And I just find that to be so harrowing, because that's something that really bothers me. Like, I'm a big freedom of speech person. And so that really bothers me. And as I'm sitting there watching him just get like ripped apart in this kangaroo court, I was frustrated. I was aggravated. Like, I was in there alongside Oppenheimer, I felt. But maybe that's just my personality.
Potentially, but I think it's also important to distinguish the fact that he's not being persecuted for his communist relationships. He's being persecuted because he made Strauss look bad, right? And I think that's one of the things. It's like, it's using the communism to justify the persecution, but it's not the reason he's being persecuted. And I think that's really important here. And I think that's why it doesn't land well with me, is because I think it's very similar to what you're saying, right? Like, it's this free speech thing, right? Like, this person's able to think this way, have these like political thoughts, and like, it's why, again, McCarthyism just really bugs me, because of the persecution of communists. And like, you also have to keep in mind, I'm not American.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Canada's involvement in the Cold War was nowhere near as extensive as the United States, and we didn't have McCarthy. Like we had communist witch hunts, obviously, but like not to the extent that like of the McCarthy era, right? And it's just to see ideology weaponized this way for pettiness doesn't feel as genuine as actually persecuting the man because of his thoughts.
But I think this is what happened, though. It was the pettiness
100%.
that actually happened. So I think that's where, like, it might not be the story you want, but it's the story that took place. And I do think,
for sure,
for better or for worse, I think Nolan played this by the history book, for better or for worse.
I mean,
I
he
think
literally adapted a novel. He literally adapted a biography, right?
But there's a lot of people who adapt biographies very poorly.
I know, but he adapted it very closely according to the authors. But another thing that gets me with this, and like maybe this again, I think this is just a personal philosophy thing when it comes to this movie. I think this is the most defining moment in the history of mankind. The creation of the atomic weapon. And I think it is brushed over so much in this movie. And because I feel like after the bomb happens, there's like an hour, 45 minutes left in this movie. And it focuses a lot more on Strauss. It doesn't focus on what does this mean for society. Right? And like, I feel like that's what could have been done to differentiate this from your typical biopic.
But I do think that in the build up and when they're trying to figure out what are we making, how are we going to tell Truman, and in the Truman scene, which I think is fantastic. I mean, a great cameo performance from Gary Oldman. Yep. You are getting those conversations of, if I make this and the Russians get it, what are we setting up? Because now we all have the ability to do this. So we might stop one, but eventually we're still concerned about this, that, and whatever. So I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, what's the one thing? I mean, I live in the Miami area now, so you know they had the whole Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, like all of those things, and then you have what do you call it? So and now all the time it's always who's going to launch the nuclear bomb. We can't go to war with Russia because of this, or we can't go to war with China because of this, and nobody's going to go to war with us because of this. It's all about the nuclear bomb. Who has the nuclear powers? That's what people talk about. Who has nuclear weapons? You can name the countries that have nuclear weapons. That's messed up. And I mean, it is crazy to think that these were created 80 years ago. Like, it's not that long ago that they were created in the history of mankind. I think it's more of, what is this movie wanting to be about? And I totally get it. Cause like, you know, it is such a monumental thing that should it be more focused on the bomb itself? And instead Nolan did elect to make it more focused on how a man who changed the history of the world was ultimately just like taken down at the end of the day over nothing.
Yeah, no. And like, I respect that. I respect the decision. It's just not what I wanted out of this film. Right. Like, and yes, it's an expectation thing. Did I have super high expectations for this movie? I mean, it's a Christopher Nolan movie. You go in with like the expectations you have, especially coming off of like his last few films.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just like, there are aspects of this film that just didn't land with me.
Such as?
Well, I mean, again, it's the writing for the most part. I thought
it's the writing for the most part.
It's the writing. It's the characters. Like, if we're looking at these side characters, there's some great like one scene performances in this movie. Like, we already talked about Gary Oldman, Casey Affleck in that one scene, fantastic, spectacular. The performance is great. The writing itself, though, is really weak. And like, some of these characters, like even like Benny Safdie's character is great, but like doesn't really get a lot. It's kind of very one note. The female characters in this movie are terribly written.
See, I totally disagree. I was about to make this comment, so I totally disagree. I love that Emily Blunt's character is not your typical biopic BS wife. I am so happy she wasn't. I this was actually what I thought was one of the strongest parts about the movie. And like, look, I guess well written, terribly written are kind of two different things, right? Because it's like, well, obviously they're two different things, but what again are they going for? I think about First Man, which I actually very much enjoyed, the Damien Chazelle movie.
Mhm.
I think about Selma, a movie I very much enjoyed. Those movies are about these larger than life male figures who are doing something so monstrous, right? Not monstrous, but massive. Massive is the right word. Martin Luther King Jr. did not do anything monstrous. Okay. Like, I'm not trying to say that. They did these massive monster things in the history of the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, these are people whose names are you say
they're monumental, right?
Boom, you know.
Yeah.
And the women, their significant other in those movies suck. They are, I'm here for you even though you're cheating on me, or I'm here for you even though you're leaving your family behind, blah, blah, blah. I love that Emily Blunt's Kitty is miserable, an alcoholic, does not care for her husband or her child at all. She is a total, what do you call that? She's just trying to work her way up society. She's trying to marry her way into a power position to get the, like, it's so abundantly clear. But I love that all of that still happens. And yet she's still a character who is making her own decisions throughout the movie. She's not making the decisions that are going to help Oppenheimer or that are going to propel the narrative forward. She's making the decisions that her character, her person really would make. I really believe that. And I feel like it gets out of this garbage trope that we have seen too often in these male heavy movies. And it makes her she's a terrible person. She's so unlikable in the movie, which I could see being frustrating. Like, I'm not trying to say she's not a bad person in this movie, but I just loved that she wasn't the, it's okay, honey, we're going to do, I just watched JFK maybe like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like, it's so bad. That character is always so bad.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all, but it almost comes across in a way that it's like this person is in opposition to Oppenheimer, like just like it doesn't come off as like this is a strong female character. It comes off as this is a female character that is designed to break this trope that you're describing right now of these female characters who are just nothing in films, right? Like it feels more tropey than it does genuine to me.
I disagree, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I just disagree. But we'll agree to disagree on that one.
Sure.
Florence Pugh's character, I mean, what'd you say?
Nothing burger.
Yeah, she didn't really do anything.
Nothing burger.
Yeah.
Although her suicide death scene, beautifully shot.
Beautifully filmed, yeah.
Like having that like black hand pushing her down and like kind of like this idea of like, was she killed by the government because she's a communist? Or is this like Oppenheimer visualizing himself being the one to kill her? Right? Like, I think that's great filmmaking. Like I said, there are these moments of brilliance in this film. It's just like as a whole, it just like didn't do it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and like I like the sex scene parts because it's showing the flaws of Oppenheimer and it's showing like where he get like, you know, and then later in the movie when they're like, no, he never found out about that affair, like talking about a totally different affair that we don't even see. Like it shows what a closed off personality he is. But I thought Florence Pugh's character was going to be a bigger part of the movie than she actually ended up being for sure. So while I really loved the Emily Blunt miserable person that she was in this movie, Florence Pugh's was, yeah, I agree with that one being kind of just like whatever.
It just felt like there were a lot of things in the movie that kind of, let's talk about the pacing of the movie, because I think this is one of the biggest discussions people are having about this film. It goes pretty, like, I felt the first part of the movie was really fast, almost too fast, in my opinion. I thought like there were too many facts coming at you. The movie is really trying to not go too heavy into the science of it all, but at the same time, like provide you with some science, but it's doing it at such a speed that it's a little hard to keep up. And I think it's at the sacrifice of some of these relationships earlier on in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with the fact of the relationships because with like you were saying earlier, like Oppenheimer with the side characters that are constantly there, none of them ever have like a big moment together. You know, like I think Josh
Mhm.
Hartnett's very good in this movie. I
Yep.
think that, you went through it. Benny Safdie's very good in this movie. I think Dylan Arnold's very good in this movie, who plays his brother. Like I think they're all very good. But I do agree that you're not sitting there being like, oh, good, like this is the person who's going to help him get through this. It's just kind of like they're all
Mhm.
pawns in his little game. Um, so I do agree with that, but I think this movie flew by. And the one thing I will say about this movie is I thought the last hour was the best hour, which in a 3 hour movie very rarely happens. Most of the time in 3 hour movies, you start to really feel that third hour, and maybe you did, but
I
I
did.
really felt that I thought the third hour the tension was high. I felt like the frustration was high. I felt like you were in there alongside him. You really understood what was going on with like the behind the scenes and this little pettiness. And I'll make a comparison to another movie after this. But I actually thought the pacing was well done because pacing has been one of the biggest issues I've had with Christopher Nolan over his last
Nolan.
movies. And I love Interstellar. I think Interstellar is a perfect movie. But his other couple movies, Dark Knight Rises, had
Mhm.
very bad pacing, in my opinion. Obviously, Tenet, the pacing is all over because the movie is all over. And then I thought Dunkirk's pacing was the biggest problem with the movie.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't watched Tenet nor Dunkirk since I saw either of them in theaters.
Mhm.
So like maybe I'm just misremembering his pacing in those films. Um, but this felt like it was kind of similarly paced to me.
Okay. Yeah,
Whereas like Interstellar, obviously we watched recently, and like that movie does not have a pacing issue. It is long and
mhm,
like it's slow and like very deliberately slow. And
mhm.
I felt like this movie could have benefited from that type of storytelling.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I kind of liked like again. I feel like he almost made an action movie out of something that wasn't an action. There was like no action
Sure.
in this movie at
Yeah.
all, and I thought that really worked. And what Jordan says here, the supporting cast really carried the third act. It was special to watch. Alden Elderick, I can never say his name,
Yeah.
but like he was fantastic as he's starting to
Yep.
make the realizations. I felt Matthew Modine was very good. That was when Benny Safdie, I feel like, really shined. Jason Clark, I thought really did a good job. I mean, whether you like his character or thought that the character was too one note, I really think Jason Clark did a very good
Hmm.
job with what he had. And one person who never gets any credit and really hasn't been in much, it often is Dane DeHaan, who I thought
Yeah.
like killed it. I wanted to punch Dane DeHaan in the face the entire time. He
Yeah.
was so obnoxious, but man, what a great performance. And he's somebody who really doesn't get that many roles because I don't know, he's just like not an A-lister. But yeah, I thought he gave a great performance down the line. So the third act really worked for me. If anything, the second act might have been the slower part, but I was invested enough in the bomb
See,
that
the second act was the part that I loved the second act of this
that's
movie.
so
Like that's the
funny.
part that I really
Me
enjoy.
and John are in a fight, guys.
Yeah. But I mean, like there are still actors in this movie we haven't even mentioned. We haven't mentioned Matt Damon at all,
Mhm.
who gives a spectacular performance.
Yeah.
And like it's just funny watching this movie and seeing all these fantastic performances to know that none of them are getting nominated other than Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr., who
Yeah.
is
And
someone else we haven't mentioned.
yeah, and I think Robert Downey Jr. is probably going to win. To be completely honest with you, because Robert Downey
Oh yeah,
Jr.
it's a fantastic performance.
It's a fantastic performance, and this is a you earn this, buddy, kind of award here. Somebody else would really have to come along. This feels like Brad Pitt with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where it's just going to be
Mhm.
enough with the name and the performance, and it's deserved, but it's going to be carried through because of the name attached to it. Robert Downey Jr. is somebody that Hollywood wants to reward for everything he's done and everything he's been through. And
Yep.
this is the perfect time to do it. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. was phenomenal in this movie. And so this was the
Mhm.
comparison I was going to make. One of my favorite movies of all time, if you listen to our top 100, Atonement, right? Atonement, I think, is a
Yep.
masterpiece. And that whole movie is based on somebody not understanding something and ruining the lives of everybody else, right? And that is what this movie, what I thought was so great about this is in this, what you said, the most important moment in human history at this point, right? Like it's
Yep.
insane. We built the atomic bomb. And what the actual plot of this movie revolves around is, as Jordan says over here, a conversation that never happened.
Yeah.
And it's this little thing of somebody, and it almost like what I think was very interesting about this, and similar to Atomic, because then Atomic gets into the war thing and humanity with war. What I thought was so interesting about this is it's still saying that even if you make the atomic bomb, which can end the world pretty much, if we wanted to drop that, we could end the world. Humans are still so concerned with the most petty, minute BS. And that is ultimately what will eat away at them over time, more so than even the atomic bomb. Like, they're more bothered by the image of themselves and being humiliated and being disrespected and all of that than they are about how they're actually impacting their fellow man. And I just think, like, to make an entire movie that is about a guy who invented the atomic bomb and base it around such a small thing is a very interesting choice. Might not be the right one for everybody, but I think it's a very interesting choice.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. Like, it's again, this isn't the movie that I expected it to be. This isn't, but like, that doesn't make it a bad movie. And again, like, that's the big thing I really want to emphasize. I don't think this is a bad movie. It is still, like, it's a good movie. It's well made. I think that, like I said, like, the script's lacking for me, but like, other than that, I've commended the visuals in this film. I've commended the acting in this film because it is done well. It's just, I don't know. I just think it's getting a lot of hype because it's a Christopher Nolan movie.
No, and I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that at all. I do hope that Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. get remembered down the line, though. And I've always said this because I've always felt this. If Christopher Nolan wins the Oscar for this, let's say he wins Best Picture and it wins Best Director, and let's say I love Killers of the Flower Moon or whatever the movie's called, like, it's too long of a title, or something else comes out that I'm just like blown away by this year, I will always go back to the fact of Christopher Nolan got nothing for Memento. He got nothing for The Dark Knight. He got nothing for Interstellar. I'm not talking about winning anything. I'm talking about he didn't get nominations for these things. I think Memento, he got nominated for Best Screenplay and didn't win. And that was a stacked year. So, like, what are you going to do? But he got no nominations. He started to get credit kind of after. It was almost like Wes Anderson for me a little bit, where it was like, okay, he had his great movies, and then he got credit for like one that really brought attention to everybody, which in his case, Grand Budapest Hotel, Dark Knight. And then all of a sudden, like, Inception gets the Oscar nomination. When you go back and rewatch Inception, it's a great action movie, but it's not like,
I love that movie,
this mind-blowing whatever. Did you say you love Inception?
I do love Inception.
Okay. Well, anyway, but like, I just feel like he never got the credit for the movies that he should have, like, in terms of like from awards things. So if he finally wins one, I said the same thing when Dunkirk came out. I was like, if he wins for Dunkirk, he wins for Dunkirk. Like, give Christopher Nolan his Oscar. He's going to deserve one at some point, right? And don't go the way of Scorsese, where you're trying to make up for it in his later years when he's not making that good of movies.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. And like, I don't know. It's really interesting. This movie's interesting. Can we talk about the one thing that like a lot of people are talking about with this movie, and how there's just like an absence of the Japanese perspective?
There is, but I also think, so where would the Japanese perspective have come in a movie about J. Oppenheimer?
I personally do not believe it belongs in this movie at all. I think if you want to see the Japanese perspective on the dropping of the atomic bomb, watch any Japanese movie made between 1945 and, I don't know, yesterday.
Seriously. I mean, like, dude, Godzilla gives a phenomenal portrayal of that. Like, that scene where they're talking about that. Like, it's crazy.
It's just funny. It's just funny to see like internet discourse about that when it's like, it's not what the film's about. And there's so many films that do it better than they would have if they shoehorned it into 10 minutes in this film.
It always comes back to this, man. It's like when Tar came out, one of the negative reviews, because there weren't many. So I like to go read them because I like to just see what people are complaining about. Because look, when you know the perspective of why people didn't like a movie, it's like, okay, so you didn't like that movie because of something that's just so ill-informed. Somebody wrote about how they didn't like Tar because even though it was well made, it was about a lesbian woman who abused people, even though she was in a position of power, and we shouldn't be making movies about that. And I was like, okay, so you didn't like this movie because it was about something you didn't want it to be about. So you just were never going to like this movie. Why did you just read the log line and know you're not going to like this movie? And I feel like when you start getting into this, well, they should have put the Japanese perspective in or anything like that. Cause I saw a little bit of that, but it's just, I feel like it's nonsense. Why? Like, that's not what this movie's about. And do you actually think that that would make this movie better? Or are you just saying that so people will give you likes on Twitter, or sorry, X, will give you likes on X, will give you likes on Instagram, will give you likes on Facebook, so people will retweet you so you can feel good about yourself because you got like 65 likes. Like, I don't think people actually believe a lot of the stuff they say. They just are so desperate for that click, that like, that whatever. And like, I'm always going to say what I'm feeling about this stuff. And to me, I completely agree with you. Like, if you want to watch a great movie about the Japanese perspective, go watch Letters from Iwo Jima. Like, and I know that's made by Clint Eastwood, but still, that is a phenomenal movie about the end of the World War II from the Japanese perspective. I don't think it fit in this movie at all. It's about Oppenheimer.
No.
And if you want to watch like a movie that's sympathetic, that's not what this movie's about. This movie is showing the negativity of the American government and how they were so single-minded on this one moment. To add in like, oh, the Japanese people are upset. Obvious. That's adding in the America Ferrera speech in Barbie. It's not necessary.
I absolutely agree. It's just one of those things that I felt we should probably talk about.
No, I
people
totally
are
agree.
talking about it, right? And it's also why, like, it's just an interesting thing. This moment in history, not this movie, but like the actual like creation of the atomic weapon, is one of the biggest like philosophical ponderances of our lifetime, like of human existence, right? Like, was it correct to make the bomb? Was it correct to drop the bomb? And is there a correct answer to that question?
Yeah. Well, and it's it's funny, John, because like I'm telling you, I watched Beneath the Planet of the Apes today. That movie has an atomic bomb that the people who live underground pray to, the Doomsday bomb.
Yeah.
Like even in 1970, in a sequel to a science fiction movie that doesn't mention an atomic bomb at all.
Yeah.
That's like what they're doing. Like it's in everything. It's in everything. It's something people are always concerned with. Yeah, I don't know. It's meant to not, I don't feel like this movie is meant to make you feel one way or the other. And sometimes that's hard for a movie for sure. Yeah.
I don't think so either, but I also don't think it poses the question, which I think is what is really lacking from this movie to make it great for me. Because I don't think it ever, there's a lot of conversation about whether or not they should drop the bomb. We had a lot of like, again, it's these side characters who don't really do anything who are saying like the unethicalness of like creating this, how it's unethical to create the bomb, how it's unethical to use the bomb on a civilian population, things like that. How, it was created to defeat the Germans, so the Germans are defeated, so we shouldn't keep creating it. There's a philosophical argument to the fact that like the Americans needed to create it and drop it so that, the Russians didn't first. Right? Like it's this arms race, and like it created the Cold War. It created this era that spanned 50 years, 45 years, if we really want to say the end of the Cold War is when the Soviet Union dissolved,
which was in the 90s, right? Or like late 80s. 91, yeah.
Christmas Day 91. It's not often I get a flexed up degree.
Yeah, dude, I'm telling you, like I knew it was late 80s, early 90s, but there you go.
But like there's so many things that I feel like I do enjoy the way that Nolan takes it. I do enjoy the focus on Strauss and the pettiness of it all. It's just you're dealing with this moment that actually has real world ramifications on like a global on an existential level. And I didn't feel like I was questioning that when I left that film.
Maybe if you would have had a guy snoring there, you would have understood the power of the atomic bomb for real. And
maybe
that question was resonating. Because I was like, man, if the atomic bomb hit this theater right now. But
it's possible. It's possible. It's also possible that like this just isn't a movie to me. I mean, I watched Past Lives again this weekend, which is like an hour and a half long of like this very like intimate story that I think is far and away the best movie that has come out this year. And like that's a movie that resonates more with me than this biopic that just feels a little hollow to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got a listener here who doesn't really pop up. I've never seen pop up. So he says Matt Damon rocked when they talked about blowing up the world right before the Trinity test. I thought that was pretty cool for sure too. And then Strange, I love the pace of this movie. Reminded me a bit of Memento, but also mostly how Nolan tackled the character's introspection. It was very Memento-y, and maybe that's why I like it more, because I love Memento. And John, I know you're not a
maybe
huge
that's why I
fan.
dislike it more.
Yeah,
I wasn't a big fan of Memento.
The way it went back and forth between the color and the black and white, and then eventually the black and white caught up to the color, and like, I thought that was interesting. I don't know. So
I agree about. I really agree about Matt Damon in that scene. Like when they like the talk of the, possibly ending the world. Wish it wasn't in the trailer for the movie though.
Yeah. See, here's the best thing, man. I haven't watched a trailer for a movie unless I'm at the theater in a very long time, and because I wasn't seeing a lot of art movies for a while, I didn't see the full trailer for Oppenheimer. I never saw it.
I did. I saw both of them.
I never saw. The only thing I ever saw was the tease. That's all I saw. I stayed away from it. And this is why I stay away from it. Like I don't watch trailers. Like I'll watch them when I'm in the theater because you really don't have a choice. But I try to stay away because I do feel like nowadays trailers ruin movies. Or in the case of Blue Beetle, they show what a true color of the movie is going to be. And oh my God, that might be the worst trailer ever cut in the history of time. But anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Is that enough? We just did an hour and 60
I think so. We did a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot longer. Okay, so
we did have a 10-minute rant about theater etiquette to start the podcast. So
we did, but still, I mean, we might need to like not go see movies we like, or like that aren't. We need to get two movies that we either really like or really hate, so that it's quicker at the end here. Because The Incredible Hulk, I was ready to stop talking about that after 5 minutes. But next week, you good again on Monday? I probably should have asked this before. Okay, so next week on Monday, we're gonna be doing Iron Man 2, and we decided on Haunted Mansion. We were talking about potentially doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or the Meg 2, but it's time to talk about everything wrong with Disney. It needs to happen. This is now going to be a Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. When Alexa and I had no Survivor content back during COVID, we did a Disney animated movie rewatch. We watched 10 of them, and John actually joined us for The Princess and the Frog. So it's time to talk about what the hell is Disney doing, because Disney's brand is falling apart before our eyes. We are literally seeing it tumble to the ground. They are having box office flop after box office flop. Their parks aren't doing as well as they try to make it seem. I live in Florida. It's right here. They're not doing that great. It's very interesting and how they're trying to figure out a way out of this. And Haunted Mansion is a $157 million movie that made $25 million its opening weekend. And while there's controversy out there about some people trying to say Little Mermaid did fine at the box office, when in reality it did not make nearly enough money to be considered a success, not even remotely a success worldwide, Haunted Mansion is a bona fide failure. And we need to talk about this movie. And I want to go see it because I like the Eddie Murphy one. Yeah, I know. There's a person here who has a top bunch of movies, and I like the Eddie Murphy one.
I'm just excited to talk about Lakeith Stanfield and Danny DeVito in the same movie.
I love Lakeith Stanfield, and I was so disappointed when this movie got bad reviews because I was like, man, you better not try to blame this on Lakeith Stanfield, because Lakeith Stanfield is a phenomenal actor. So next week, we decided it's going to be Iron Man 2 and The Haunted Mansion. And if I remember correctly with Iron Man 2, I did not like it. So this could be a very negative week if I don't like Haunted Mansion. And even if I do, I'm going to be like, what is Disney doing? So many questions, John. But we're going to do it next week. So make sure to tune into that if you're a Disney fan, if you're annoyed with Disney right now. This is the podcast for you. That's it. That's what I got. We'll see you guys next week, next Monday night around 8:15, somewhere in that range, depending on John getting off the trolley in the rain. So we'll see you all then.